All right. Kristov Atlas, welcome back to the Gnostic Media Podcast. I'm excited to have you back to go into our continuing discussion on anonymous Bitcoin, cryptography, and online safety. And today you've got things set up to do some screen shares with the audience, and I'm pretty excited about this episode, so welcome back.
Thanks so much for having me again.
And so today we're going to be discussing Tor and I2P and Tails Linux, probably incognito web as well, and hopefully whatever dark net stuff you want to bring to the audience's attention. And so this is going to be sort of I don't know, interactive would be the right word, but people can follow along. We're going to be sort of doing a step-by-step with how this stuff works. Why don't we start off with letting the audience know what is a dark net?
Sure. Dark nets are very, very interesting. So, when the internet was first developed, the idea was just simply that there was going to be a single internet, a global network of computers that could communicate with each other. And, a big feature of that internet was the World Wide Web, where you'd have these web servers serving up web pages to people. And one of the design failures of the original internet is that it was not designed with very much privacy in mind. A lot of the original design revolved around simply just making sure that packets got to where they needed to go. These internet messages that need to zoom around from one application to another, one computer to another. They wanted to make sure that it just got there for sure. Obviously, that's the most important feature. And they didn't think about privacy too much at all. And after some time passed, people realized we really would prefer to be able to use this internet with more privacy, but it's kind of too late to change the underlying protocols. They've already ossified. Too many people are using them already, and they can't be readily changed. So people came up with this idea of kind of splintering off parts of the internet away from the regular internet, having kind of separate internets. And so a dark net is simply, it's kind of like its own version of the internet, but it's separate from the regular internet that everyone is familiar with. And you need special software in order to interact with this dark net. And there are bridges in between the various dark nets and the internet. But the main idea is that it's kind of a separate network outside of the standard internet that everyone else is using.
And when you say separate, it's not just piggybacking on top, it's outside it. Is that, or is it actually piggybacking on top using cryptography?
Really, it's using cryptography. We're still talking about using the same computers. It's not like a separate, it's not like an air-gapped network like they might have at a secret location in the military, or some really sensitive material at a bank or whatever, where literally those computers are not physically attached to any other
Right.
computers. That would be an air gapped
So,
sequence. So it's still using the same machines, the same routers that we use for our regular internet backbone, but we're using cryptography to kind of create this kind of tunnel between the computers that are participating in the darknet. And you can't tap into the darknet unless you're using this special software, because you cannot decrypt the messages or encrypt the right kind of messages in order to get on the darknet. So it's exactly right. It's using encryption to create this darknet.
and I just had the mind to make a joke when you said air gap network. It reminded me of the cold storage at Mount Gox.
Yeah, right.
All
Cold
right.
storage.
Cold
Yeah.
storage, yeah. That was a joke, ladies and gentlemen. And by the way, and we've said this in the past, Mt. Gox and Bitcoin are not the same thing. Anyway, so what is the difference between Tor and I2P? And we kind of covered this a little bit, and maybe, I don't know, maybe at this point we could even start showing people on screen some of, what Tor looks like, what I2P looks like, that sort of thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So Tor and I2P, they're just two separate darknets. and they both use cryptography to create this kind of this hidden network that's going through the internet, but it's all encrypted in a special way, and they're encrypted in slightly different ways. Tor is based on this idea of kind of like onion. They call it onion routing, and this simply is referring to a way of the computers that are participating in the darknet. How do they pass messages around to one another? You get privacy by kind of bouncing the messages around a bunch randomly between different participants in the darknet until it gets to its final destination, so that anyone that's trying to kind of trace the path in there, they can't do it because they have to go over, they would have to hack every single computer in a series of hops in the network in order to actually trace those messages. So Tor's got the onion router, and I2P uses something called like a garlic routing, which is similar to onion routing, but it's a little bit different, maybe a little bit more advanced in some ways.
And so, when you say garlic, I think of like garlic cloves wrapped sideways this way instead of going this way. Is that kind of the idea?
Yeah, exactly. Both the onion and the garlic metaphor are just referring to these different layers and the ways that you structure these different layers, just like the vegetables.
All right. So, do we want to show people on screen? You want to do a share screen of?
Absolutely. So let me
All right.
just
And we've never done a presentation like this, ladies and gentlemen. So bear with us. Hopefully, we managed to do this without any technical glitches. All right.
All right. So if you can see my screen right now, what I'm showing you is a special operating system just designed for interacting with these different dark nets, and it's called Tails Linux. And the whole purpose of Tails, Tails stands for the amnesic incognito live system. The idea is that it's an operating system that you can kind of boot into, different from your regular operating system. You don't put it on a hard drive. You would store it on something like a USB disk or a DVD or something like that. And you'd use this special operating system to access these darknets like Tor and I2P. And in fact, Tails can access both of them, although it's primarily designed to access Tor. And the idea here is that it's just kind of whenever you boot into it, it's in a known good state. It's not going to be infected with any malware, regardless of what you're doing with the machine.
And
Um,
let me just
Go
interject
ahead.
real here. When people download the Tails software from the website, there is also a MD5 SHA-256 code there that they can verify that was the intended package that the makers of Tails Linux wanted to put out, so that nobody does any spoof websites or something like that, and
Sure.
you get a bad version. So I just wanted to throw that in.
Yeah, and also a way of detecting potential man-in-the-middle attacks. I mean, imagine if some advanced adversary was trying to get you to download a bad version that had some kind of backdoor included into it. You can cryptographically prove that these versions that you're downloading are correct and haven't been tampered with.
All right, so I'm just going to let you go here. Why don't you give us a walk through Tails and where things are and what they do and that sort of thing, so that people really get what Tor is. And and I should say, Tor is something, and you just said you can download it onto a disk, onto a DVD. You can put it on a jump drive, so that you can just plug that in or stick the disk in and load that operating system, and you don't necessarily need to do anything with your normal operating system. That can still be there, and the two don't interact. So go
Yeah,
ahead.
so this is Tails. So this is my favorite way to access Tor or I2P, just because I can really like rely on it to be secure and difficult for people to tamper with and so forth. Whereas my regular operating system, it's very difficult to keep your regular operating system uninfected with malware completely. This is not the only way that you can access Tor. There's actually even easier ways that you can do. Like you can download the Tor browser, which is available on a variety of operating systems such as Windows, Linux, and Mac OS X as well. And that's probably the easiest way to get on Tor. It's just like it acts like a regular browser, but you use it separately from your normal web browser. It's a little bit less secure because you don't necessarily know that it's not being tampered with, and it's not like kind of like hardened in terms of security as much as Tails is. But that's another way that you can get on there, and there's other ways to interact with Tor as well. But I really do want to call people's attention to Tails in particular. So this is just like a version of Linux. It's actually based on Debian Linux. And if you're familiar with Linux at all, then this should seem pretty familiar. And even if you're not, it's not too different from your Windows or your Mac operating system. And so you have your file browser where you would store files. Now, the difference would be that you're not going to be storing files on your hard drive. You could store files on kind of like a USB disk or something like that if you want them to persist. And everything else that's happening in this operating system is all running in RAM. It's all in like this kind of temporary transient space rather than being stored on your hard drive, which could be forensically recovered later on. But so you have like kind of a home directory, you have your desktop, etc., right? And if you right click on the file browser, you can create folders, you can create new text files, all of the usual stuff that you'd be familiar with Windows or Mac.
It has word processing software and all of that stuff.
Let's see, what does it have for that? Yeah, it
Yeah,
has
it
Open
does.
Office
How about
included, which
that?
is nice.
And so
And
you can do all of your writing, anything that you would need to do. It probably, I would assume, would have some sort of email program in there as well, because if people are going to be using this to communicate and try to keep their privacy, all of this would sort of, I would assume, need to be there already, right?
yeah, absolutely. Now,
Oh,
if you
oh,
want to, go ahead.
let me just say real quick, we should emphasize that most Linux operating systems in general, as opposed to Mac OS X or Windows, are free. So anybody can go and download this stuff.
Absolutely, yeah, this is completely free. And I think it may be open source as well.
Yes.
So here's the little terminal thing, which is like the command prompt in Windows or terminal on your Mac. And that's where you can enter commands in the console if you need to. Generally speaking, you won't need to do that. The whole purpose of this is to make it easy for people to do stuff. But if you had to do something special out of the ordinary, then you could enter your commands here, like list the contents of the directory, print your working directory, all that kind of stuff. So where this really shines is just including a whole bunch of applications that make it really easy to do stuff through Tor. So for example, you can see there's this little like email icon up here. It's the Claws Mail email client. And if you go ahead and click on that, the email client will open. This is running a little bit slow because I've got it in a virtual machine, but usually it's quite speedy, just as fast as your
Right.
normal operating
Yeah,
system would be.
the reason why we're running it in virtual machine is so that he can share it with the audience, and we can just do a share screen, and then we can share it with all of you out there. So
Exactly. So as you can see, when you open it up for the first time, you'll have to like kind of configure your mail client, give your information and whatnot. And there's actually a number of websites out there. I can't rattle them off the top of my head, but you can create free anonymous email accounts with these websites, register with them, and then you could use Claws Mail to actually do basically anonymous email. Through this client, which is quite nice as well. So we won't step through all the processes of setting up the mail client, but once you set it up, it's pretty standard mail client. Now we also have an instant messaging client as well. This is Pigeon, which many people are already familiar with. It's a pretty popular instant messaging client, and you can do your AOL Instant Messenger. You can get on IRC with this, all that kind of stuff. It's got the buddy list, and you can add different instant messaging accounts and whatnot. And everything that you do through Tails, the really nice thing about Tails is that it just goes through Tor automatically. You don't have to set anything up. Whereas if you were going to access Tor through other means, if you just install the Tor browser on your regular computer, then only the stuff that you do in that browser will go through Tor. Everything else on your operating system is going to be going through your regular internet and potentially leaking information about your Tor usage as well. And so the nice thing about this is like, you load up in Tails and you don't have to worry about that whatsoever. No configuration and no concerns about leaking information about your identity as well.
Now,
So that,
the only drawback would be that each time you start Tails, your whatever you saved before, unless you save it to your jump drive or somewhere else, it's not going to be there. It's going to start completely clean, and so you will need to enter your username and passwords and Pigeon and in your Claw email, etc. each time. So this is you deciding. Instead of ease and clicking and having everything right there. If you want some security, you need to step back and take responsibility for it.
yes. Now, the one exception to that is they have included a kind of a feature in Tails called the persistence volume. I haven't personally messed around with it too much because I usually have a different way of keeping my data on USB drives, but they actually, so you can configure a way of like storing all this information on like a dedicated USB stick, and you can encrypt it and all that. And that way, whenever you use Tails, you can just plug in this USB stick with the persistence volume, and then this is a way of like storing your email configuration, all that stuff. So you don't have to set it up every single time you open Tails. So you can kind of restore it off of that USB drive, which is quite nice. So let's just to give you a general idea of how this all works. We'll just walk through the applications. If you ever needed to configure your computer or whatever, you can go under this system menu, and you've got your monitor display, your mouse, sound, all that kind of stuff. Um, but the applications is where most of the stuff is located. Calculator, text editor, KeyPass is a like a program that you can use to store passwords on there if you don't want to. It's a password manager if you don't want to keep typing in your passwords all the time.
And
Um,
then you would save that to that drive thing, or have a file stored somewhere else that you would import into this each time, right?
yeah, exactly.
Okay.
Some graphic editors, some scanning software, it looks like. Claw's Mail, as we talked about before, is the email client. There's a special thing just for I2P access specifically, so you can access I2P through Tails. This is kind of a work in progress for them, though. That's more a Tor focused piece of software.
Now,
Um, yep.
let me ask you a question about I2P because I installed it and signed on to it a few times, and then it says to wait for a little while, but I could never get it to access any of the websites or things there. What was I doing wrong?
It's hard to say. It's I2P. One of the downsides of it is that it's still kind of a hit or miss as far as getting, beginner users accessing it easily. The project is still, woefully underfunded compared to something like Tor and even Tails. The Tails people get most of their funding through Tor, through the Tor project. So that's one of the downsides of I2P is like you're gonna have to be, doing a lot more Google searching in order to figure out how to use stuff.
Okay, got it.
And we'll open up the web browser in just a moment. We'll talk about that for a moment. But you have your web browser as well. Open Office, which is a free kind of Office suite. Um, Audacity sound editor. You can play movie files. So yeah, just like a lot of your standard stuff that you would expect in an operating system. So now let's open up the web browser. And I've already had this computer connected for a while, but if you were just opening up Tails for the first time, you'd see a few messages pop up in the top right hand of the side of the screen, telling you about the status of the network connection and so forth. Like it would tell you, okay, look, we've booted up now. Now we've connected to the Tor network, that kind of stuff. And you can actually see there's like this little green onion icon here that lets you know that it is currently connected to the Tor network, and that you're good to go as far as that goes. And we'll just give it a moment to open up the web browser. Now this web browser is it's called Iceweasel, and it's very much based on the Firefox web browser. So people
It,
who have used Sorry, go ahead.
They're both Mozilla.
Yeah, exactly. So if people have used Firefox before, then Iceweasel may look very familiar to them as well. And it has a series of plugins that are included in the web browser that help you just browse the web more anonymously. So it has some script blocking plugins that are included. It's got some stuff for, blocking cookies and all that stuff. And of course, it does have plugins that make sure that all of the network traffic goes through a Tor as well. And all of these plugins are important because normally the way that browsers are configured, they're leaking a lot of information about you and your machine to the internet websites that you're accessing. And so having a nice pre-configured browser that tries to avoid all that stuff is really, really nice. And it's not advised to install your own plugins into Tor browser or to this Tails web browser either. You just want to go with what's pre-installed because it's all been kind of thoroughly vetted and so forth. So just a few features to point out here. You can see it's got this little Tor icon. The script blocking plugin that I mentioned before is called NoScript. And when you first open up the web browser, at first it won't be blocking any scripts in particular. And so it will show this little S and then an exclamation point, just indicating that, like, look, right now, it's not blocking any scripts. So what I generally advise people to do if they want to use things as anonymously as possible is first thing they do when they open up Tor browser or when they open up this Iceweasel browser in Tails, they go ahead and click on forbid scripts globally, which they do say is advised. And that's going to go ahead and block any scripts that would want to run on your machine until you explicitly allow them. There's also a little web search pane over here in the window, and you can see it's actually not Google. They use Start Page because apparently Start Page is a little bit more respectful of privacy. So that's good as well. There's also this little, when you first open up the browser, there's like this Tor check button that you can click on if you want to, just to reassure yourself that all of your web traffic is in fact going through Tor.
Now, up there by the S where you block the scripts is another onion there, and I just wanted to point out that onion right there will flash if your Tor and your Tails is out of date.
Yeah, exactly. You'll see like a little exclamation point, and it just will point out to you. Right now I'm using the latest version of Tails. I think it's version 1.01 at the time of us recording this.
Right.
But yeah, and so let's see. So if I click on this NoScript icon again, right now all the scripts, JavaScript, Flash, all that kind of stuff is currently blocked. And so I'd have to click on temporarily allow all this page in order to allow scripts to run if I needed them to run, or I can go into the options and kind of whitelist certain domains. Like if I really trust YouTube scripts, I don't think that they're going to do anything malicious, then I could add YouTube as a whitelist option here. Already they have mozilla.org and things like that are allowed to run scripts. But I'll just go to YouTube for a moment just to show you stuff is not going to work it's not going to work because we don't have scripts running.
And then because it is going through the Tor network, it is a touch slower than it would be if it was just on the open network, correct?
That is quite true. That is certainly true. And it really depends on which computer. So like when you're connecting through Tor, especially when you're using Tails, you just get like a bunch of random computers that are routing your encrypted Tor traffic around the Tor network. And so it's a little bit of a lottery to determine whether you're going to end up with these different participants that have like good bandwidth or bad bandwidth. It does certainly try to make sure that you have the best bandwidth that you possibly can get, but it is a bit of a lottery there since it's kind of random.
And in this case, you're basically weighing the benefit of super fast versus super safe. And
exactly.
So sometimes you might want super fast, and now we're showing you how to use super safe.
Yes, exactly. So this is definitely much more on the safe and private end of the spectrum rather than usable. Although I do think that Tails has done quite a good job of making Tor much more accessible to people while really maintaining those privacy features. And so as
Good.
you can see with this YouTube video, like it's just not loading because the scripts are currently being blocked.
And so this would tell you if you can even get to your IP address or.
Yeah, I'm just typing in here. We're going to go to a website real quick just to see what does it think my IP address is, just to show that. So I'm located in the U.S., but more than likely when I go to check what it thinks my IP address is, according to this website, it will see some non-U.S. IP address. Um, yeah, so right now I'm actually accessing the internet through someone in Germany, in Rhineland. um, but
So
yeah.
with just a little bit of quick magic, Kristov is surfing the internet from Germany.
And this is exactly what Tor is all about. It's about temporarily assuming the identity of other people that are participating in the Tor network so
And
that
then, but
people are,
someone out there though assuming your identity, or is it all mixed up, or how does that work?
it depends on how you wish to participate in the Tor network. By default, right now, I'm not contributing anything to the Tor network. Really, I'm not
Got
relaying other
you. So
messages from people. They're not using my. You have to explicitly configure your software to share your bandwidth with other people in the Tor network if you want to, which is a nice thing to do, but just you don't have to, and it's not the default option. So that's pretty much the browser, and that's pretty much Tails. All of the basic stuff that you need: your instant messaging, your email, your Word documents, your web browsing. It's all included in Tails, and it's all pre-configured for you to make things as easy as possible. It is all a little bit slower in terms of the internet connection, but other than that, I think it is quite usable. And one of the cool things that's happening down the road with Tor is that we're going to see Tor be incorporated into cryptocurrencies, so that
you got.
because part of the problem, like I said, you don't have to contribute your bandwidth to the Tor network if you don't want to, and most people don't. They just consume bandwidth in Tor, and there's not much reason for them to incentivize them to do so. And so once we have cryptocurrency powered Tor, then people will have an incentive. Their computers will get paid some token or some cryptocurrency for relaying messages for other people, for contributing their bandwidth to the Tor network. And I think that when that happens, that's going to be a huge network with really, really good bandwidth, where you might get to the point where you can't even notice the difference between your regular internet service provider connection and using the Tor network.
So those of you who have huge internet service and huge bandwidth and huge servers, connect to the Tor network and make it faster for the rest of us.
Absolutely.
All right, so let's see. Why don't we go into now? Does the Tor or does the Tails operating system come with a Bitcoin software?
It does not currently. I have communicated quite a bit with the Tails developers on this topic. They're still a bit chilly towards cryptocurrencies for whatever reason. But one of my ongoing projects is being the annoying gadfly on the back of the Tails developers and also all of the different cryptocurrency client developers, and trying to make sure that the two are compatible. So I've been doing that with the Bitcoin people, Darkcoin people, and the Tails people all together, and just nagging them to make sure that it's compatible. So as of right now, Bitcoin does work. The standard Bitcoin client works fine with Tails. However, some of the other clients like Electrum and Multibit, at least the last time that I checked, don't work with Tails quite yet. So I'm just continuing to nag at them, and I encourage other people to do so as well.
Are you able to show the audience how they might download and install the Bitcoin software into Tails and get it running?
Sure, we can do that. So it's the simplest way to do it is simply to download it as you normally
Why
would.
don't we show on screen what you would type? Like, I don't know if you're going to go to the to the terminal and type it in, or if you're going to go to the bitcoin.org to download it, etc. So let's just walk them through because
Yeah,
Linux might be a little
absolutely.
confusing for people.
Absolutely. All right. So let's get my screen share going again. We'll jump back into Tails. All right. So simply you could go into Tails and do a search for like Bitcoin client. And what they provide is a Linux client, and we'll download that one. There's one for Ubuntu specifically. We're not going to use that one. So I did a search for Bitcoin client, and I'm just going to go with the first one here for bitcoin.org/en/download. That's obviously for the English version of Bitcoin. And when it comes up, we'll go to the Linux version. Now, I think they're going to be coming out with a new version of the Bitcoin client pretty shortly, and I'm not positive. They had some compatibility issues with Tails Linux in the recent past. I don't know if they've definitely fixed them, so I'm actually just going to grab a slightly older version of it because I know that it works. So
And you
what
did
I
grab the Linux version rather than the Ubuntu version. Now, let me
yeah,
just ask you
exactly.
this: isn't Ubuntu also based on Debian? So why wouldn't the two be compatible?
The reason is because Ubuntu is more up to date with which version of Debian that they're based on. There's some graphical display packages that are kind of bundled up with Bitcoin. It's a Python Qt library that's used, and they've had some challenges related to. So Tails Linux, they're still based on kind of like an older version of Debian. The next thing that they're going to do is they're going to get it more up to date, but they had to delay the release of that. So where I'm at right now, I'm at bitcoin.org/bin/ version 08.6, which I just happen to know is definitely compatible with Tails. So I'm going to download that particular version. And it might take a few minutes for me to download this Linux file. So we may have to come back to it into a minute. But
Yeah, again, ladies and gentlemen, the reason why it's going a little bit slow is because it's rerouting through Rhineland and Germany and then back to the East Coast in the US. And then on top of that, Kristov is sharing this on the screen share with me in California. So we're sending signals all over the world here.
absolutely. And you can see this is like a really a powerful example of how uh, it's difficult to like engineer privacy and security into software after the fact. The fact of the matter is that when they originally designed the internet, there was not a lot of privacy or security designed into the system, and so when you need to try and like add it on as a band-aid later on, it makes things quite inefficient. So that's just one of the challenges. I'm very interested. I haven't learned a lot about it yet, but I'm interested in this Made Safe um, project that's hoping to, in many ways, kind of re-architect the internet and challenge some of the underlying protocols. Not all of them. It's not a complete redesign of the internet, but it does dig pretty deep in terms of how far it goes in changing the way that computers network with each other. And it's designing the security and the privacy directly into that software. And so I'm expecting that it will be quite a bit more efficient for connecting with other computers in a secure and private fashion. So I've finished downloading the file here. Are you familiar with the MadeSafe project?
I am not at all, so enlighten all of us, please.
Well, just the general idea is that they are kind of challenging the basic client server model that we use for the vast majority of internet traffic out there. And I'm going to open up. So right here, I'm just going into the downloads. I'm going to open up the containing folder, and we're going to. This is like it's an archived, reduced
It would just
size
be like a zip
file.
file or
Exactly, it's
or
just
an
like a zip
exe
file.
file for Windows or something.
So I'm going to open it up and we'll unarchive it, and then we can run the Bitcoin client. But yeah, so back to MadeSafe. So they're changing this kind of model. So they have a slightly different model, and people that participate in the MadeSafe network, they get paid. Their computers get paid basically to provide resources, whether that's hard drive space or bandwidth or whatever. They have kind of a proof of resource system where people are getting paid to do what they do. And the other thing that's cool about it, the reason why there's kind of like security and privacy baked into it, is that they're sending internet traffic, all over the world, and they do it in these little slices. So let's say, for example, you wanted to store some your music collection in this made safe kind of cloud. What it will do is it will encrypt all of those files, break them up into tiny slices, and then store those slices all over the world on other people's hard drives. And those people will not be able to decrypt it because they don't have the necessary private keys, just like in Bitcoin, that you need to
And then
decrypt stuff.
even if they did, they would only get little bits, just like you were downloading on BitTorrent or something, correct?
Exactly. Yeah, yeah. So it slices and dices things all up, and that's quite nice.
So
All right. So
and then you would, when you join that network, you would designate so much storage space that on your system that you're willing to allow other people out there to share on yours. So it's basically another decentralized storage cryptography system. And I'd never even heard of that. So that is really interesting. Okay,
yeah, and they
you might want to explain. There was you just uh, unarchived the file there, and then there was a 32-bit version and a 64-bit version. And we should
right.
probably point out to people that Tails Linux currently is 32-bit only, I believe.
Exactly. So that's why I went into the Bitcoin Linux folder. I wanted to bin for binary as opposed to the source code because I don't want to look at the source code. And then I selected the 32-bit folder. And the one file, the one executable that we're interested in is Bitcoin Qt, which I'm now going to double click on, and that should open up the Bitcoin client. And since we're opening it up for the first time, what it's going to do is it's going to start out by generating a new Bitcoin wallet, deriving some Bitcoin addresses from new private keys that it generates randomly. And then if I wanted to, so if I wanted to actually go ahead and send and receive some Bitcoins using the client, one of the challenges is that I would now need to download the entire blockchain, which is now, some maybe 16 gigabytes or so in size. And so, not only is that slower to download through Tor, but also if we're not using this persistence thing, then it doesn't, like, you'd have to re-download the blockchain each time you opened up this Bitcoin Qt client. And so still lots of stuff to be worked out in terms of
Right.
compatibility between Tails and Bitcoin, but it's definitely something that they're working on.
So if it was integrated in there, and then you could download that blockchain once, or I guess you wouldn't want a 16 gig version of Tails. That would be too large. So, but once you would get it downloaded, you would put it in that that encrypted drive or whatever that we talked about earlier, and then you could access it that way. But what we should also point out is that while all of this seems very difficult, going back to the browser, if you have a blockchain.info address, you would be able to use the Iceweasel browser and then just go to blockchain.info and then handle everything there using the Tor network. Is that correct?
Exactly, absolutely. So that's probably, that's if you wanted to do Tor and you wanted to do Bitcoin, that would probably be the absolute simplest way to go about doing it, is creating something like a blockchain.info account. Or there's other web wallets that are out there that are also quite good as well, but blockchain.info is certainly the most well known of those.
All right, so and this is obviously going to take a while to load here. So, and the reason why it's also going slow on your system is because you are using virtual machine, which means that part of your computer is using the the CPU and the RAM to run your primary operating system, and then some of it has been designated as a virtual machine to run Tails inside, so that you can show all of this to the audience. So again, please forgive us for the delays here. Next time we'll have to get some huge, Intel Xeon processor or something. But
Yep. Blame it on my old laptop.
there you go. All right. So, well, in the meantime, while that's loading, why don't we? And we already discussed that dummy drive. Is that what that was, or was that something else? What was the dummy drive? I forget now.
Oh, so that's in TrueCrypt, right? Which is
Oh, yeah. So let's get to TrueCrypt.
So TrueCrypt, actually, it's been embroiled in some controversy recently. It's always had these pseudonymous or anonymous developers who wrote TrueCrypt. We don't know the real identities of those people, and they posted this like kind of cryptic, alarming message on their website recently, and people were like, "Oh, TrueCrypt has been compromised," and all this kind of stuff. I think it's still fine to use. And actually, some people are planning on forking the project and kind of picking it back up because it is open source. But so to if people have kind of heard anything weird about TrueCrypt recently, I would say it's still probably perfectly fine to use. And what it does is it creates encrypted file containers for you to store other files. So it's like it can create a file that can store other files within it, and it will encrypt those. And you can encrypt that with a password. You can encrypt it with another file that could be some random data or whatever. And it's just a way of protecting your information so that if someone had access to your laptop or USB drive or whatever it is, if they don't have the password, then they can't decrypt that information.
And yeah, there was some vulnerability. I remember seeing an email come through on, what is it, Crypto Group or whatever that group is. Tom had turned me on to their email list, and they had sent a notice out about that. Now, that would obviously be somewhat similar to, and I'm just trying to think of the name of it here, the Microsoft version, which is... what does Microsoft call theirs? BitLocker. Would that be similar, or and maybe Microsoft's version might have its issues, as TrueCrypt seems to right now as well.
Right. Yeah, comparable to BitLocker. I actually trust TrueCrypt more than I trust BitLocker because BitLocker is not, as far as I know, is not open source, and I trust Microsoft to write secure software about as far as I can throw them. So yeah, TrueCrypt is kind of the leading open source encryption software right now.
All right, so now we go to TrueCrypt, and we've done all of that. Why don't we? Well, is your VM totally used up, or can
it's not? It's not locked up. It's just going a bit slow. But I'll end the share for the moment, and we'll switch back to it when it's finished loading up the.
All right,
because
what I would like to do, if possible, is go for a minute into explaining what the dummy drive is inside the TrueCrypt, and it's like you can set up. You have inside TrueCrypt, as far as I understand it, is you would typically have your encrypted drive where you would put all your main data, and then you have a secondary hidden drive that you can designate the size of, and you can put files in there. So let's say you're out somewhere at an airport and somebody comes up to you and they say, give me your password to access, this drive or whatever. You have two different passwords. So one password would open up your real files and all of your real stuff, and then another password would open up the dummy drive and your fake files, or your you might stick your bogus porn collection or something, whatever, in there, so that people, that's why he's got this drive locked up, and then that it would sort of hopefully deter them from looking or trying to crack further. Would that be a good analogy?
Yeah, you can think of this dummy drive versus a hidden drive as kind of like a hidden drawer or something like that. Someone demands that you open up your drawer, you unlock it, they don't see anything in there, but down below, hidden below that is another little, a little pocket where you keep your really hidden stuff. So same principle. You'd have two different passwords for unlocking each one, and the idea is that they designed their cryptography in such a way that you can't prove that there's another hidden drive below the standard one, before below the dummy one. That they can't say for sure, okay, well, there's another drive here. I demand that you decrypt it. And in some places in the world, unfortunately, there are people who are given a special kind of like moral category, and they within their rules, it's perfectly acceptable for them to demand that you type in a password into your computer, or they'll throw you in a prison. And that's just the world that we live in. And so, with that type of situation in mind, they invented these kind of dummy drives. So it's like, okay, well, I'll go ahead and decrypt it. You're just not going to see anything interesting to you when I do so.
And for all of those who think, well, I don't need any privacy. I would share everything because I'm not doing anything wrong. Well, the idea with being secure in your personal property and effects, et cetera, is that, they need a warrant and things like this to just go in and dig through your material, and that this is a way that we can protect ourselves since the Constitution and everything has been so horribly eroded away.
And it's not just about police too. I mean, imagine if you're some wealthy Bitcoin person and a thief comes up to you, or a ransom artist or something like that, and they demand that you decrypt your USB drive. Well, you can decrypt your dummy drive for them instead of the hidden one that actually stores your Bitcoin related files.
All right. And let's see. How are we going to discuss hot and cold storage? I know I mentioned it a little bit ago. Well, yeah, I suppose we can just discuss it rather than trying to show it, or maybe you could bring
Mhm.
up the VM again and we can sort of show how that would work as well.
Well, I think it's a little bit hard to show. It's actually a little bit easier to explain, I think.
Now, okay,
Um,
well, but
sure.
using tails, we can go into tails and show them how they don't need to be connected to the internet. Maybe show them where they would turn off from the internet and things like that, just so
Sure.
that. All right.
So to understand hot and cold storage is this term. It actually predates bitcoins or cryptocurrencies, but it's just the general idea is like, if you're storing data, is it on a computer that has touched the internet or not? If it's in a space that has never touched the internet, then it's considered cold storage. If it's on a space that connects to the internet, then it's considered hot storage. So like cold, no internet; hot, internet. Hot meaning it's supposed to connote kind of like a sense of danger or something, right? Because anything that is connected to the internet is at much greater risk for being hacked and being tampered with. And so in the Bitcoin space, what we're concerned about in particular are these things called private keys. You don't really need to understand exactly what a private key is, but it's the secret that allows you to prove to the Bitcoin network that you own the Bitcoins that you own. You present these that you use the private keys in a way that allows you to spend your Bitcoins, and doesn't allow anyone else to spend their Bitcoins if they don't have that private key. It's just some data. And so ideally you want to put that data in a spot that's not connected to the internet, because then it will be much more difficult for someone else to get a hold of and use to steal your Bitcoins. And so in that state, we would say that your Bitcoins or your private key are held in cold storage, and therefore are more safe than something like hot storage. So if you have a blockchain.info account, and you're using Bitcoin only through blockchain.info, then necessarily all of your Bitcoins will be said to be in hot storage, because it's a website that you have to access in order to get to your Bitcoins.
Okay, so now just to explain this using Tails. So we just saw Tails up on the screen and how that worked. Now, basically what you would do to create cold storage, and this is a kind of a tricky concept for people to understand, because the cryptography that Bitcoin uses, the SHA-256 number, is so long that it can generate random numbers and never duplicate the random number without being connected to the internet. So when you're in Tails and you have, and you have your cold version of Tails up, and you have your Bitcoin software up in there, you might, create a paper wallet or whatever, and I totally forgot to put paper wallets in the list. But you can generate a paper wallet Bitcoin address and then send those to this Bitcoin address without ever using one of your live machines. And then you can go to or essentially you can generate that address on a cold machine and then send it to that address from a live machine, and they would never know who that address was associated to.
Yeah, exactly. So the thing that you need to understand about Bitcoin in order to understand this concept, it's a little bit counterintuitive, a little bit confusing at first, but you can actually create new Bitcoin addresses and receive Bitcoins at that address without ever being online. Just because to the Bitcoin, like, you don't need to announce a new Bitcoin address to the Bitcoin network. All the Bitcoin network does is it says, okay, well, you're sending it to this string of letters and numbers. Does it look like a legitimate Bitcoin address or not? If it does, then it just records that in the blockchain, which is this public ledger. It doesn't try to make sure that, oh, well, who owns this Bitcoin address? When was it created or anything like that? There's no concept of that. So it's actually, you can receive Bitcoins without actually being online. So let's say you're at PorkFest and their internet connection was busted, but the person that you're selling to could actually get his phone on the internet. He could pay you in Bitcoin, and you don't even have to be necessarily online in order to receive those Bitcoins.
He could just hold it up and show you that he sent it to your address, and you would just
and you
wait till
don't
you got
even need
home.
a computer. Like, you could literally have a printout of a QR code. Like, a lot of places where you buy stuff with Bitcoin, you go into their store, they printed out a QR code on a piece of paper, and that's how they sell stuff. They don't even have a computer to receive the Bitcoins.
Ladies and gentlemen, please use the QR code on the top of the Gnostic Media website to make your donations.
Absolutely. So that's one of the cool things about Bitcoin, is that you don't need a computer in order to receive Bitcoins necessarily. You just need a computer to actually spend Bitcoins in order to send them to other Bitcoin addresses. And that's the principle that allows us to put Bitcoins in cold storage. Is we can create an address not connected to the internet and continue to receive Bitcoins, and that those Bitcoins will always be held in cold storage until you go ahead and spend those Bitcoins and take them out of cold storage.
Now, what I want to add also for the audience here is that understanding hot and cold storage and what a paper wallet is in the Bitcoin world, a lot of people think, well, if you have a paper wallet to store your money in, it's just the same as fiat currency. And, we're just going right back to, the days of the Greek temples where the priests, where you would deposit your money into the temple, right? And so then the priest would go around and, this is where money changing and all of this usury stuff begins from. So,
right.
But in fact, Bitcoins cannot be fractionally reserved and all of this stuff. And essentially, yes, you can print this. It's just a number, really, that you're printing out. And it's just, you don't have to print it out. You can memorize it in your head, or, whatever you want to, however you want to store this number. But understanding the capability of what Bitcoin really is, if you can, if you get a little bit of Bitcoin, if you bought $10 worth of Bitcoin or whatever you wanted to get, you don't have to buy $600 or $700 worth, like one Bitcoin all at once. But if you send that Bitcoin to a paper wallet, just the process of going through Tails and creating, getting the paper wallet generator, you putting it on your Tails, going to the browser and generating an address, dragging the mouse around and all of that, and then taking that number and sending your Bitcoins to it, it really enables the mind to, conceptualize what Bitcoin really is. So, if you haven't done a paper wallet yet, and you have a little bit of Bitcoin, or just go out and get a little bit of Bitcoin, just so that you can go through this process, just to grasp it. Because, I think most people are pretty blown away when they really get their head around what a paper wallet is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, in reality, Bitcoin does not have any semblance to any previous banking system in the history of the world. There is no counterparty like a priest or a central bank or whatever. The minting of coins and the verification of the authenticity of transactions is all decentralized. It's done by computers that are located all over the world. And the reason why Bitcoin works is because we can trust that a majority of users are going to participate in the network in a fair way. They're not going to try and cheat other people by trying to accept invalid transactions and so forth. And the reason why we can rely on that is not because human beings are naturally good or anything like that. It's just that we can count on people's greed. And so if they're trying to abuse the network and try to create false transactions, then Bitcoin's going to fail. They're going to lose all the Bitcoins that they've been mining, and so it's simply not going to happen. And it would be very difficult for something like the government or some evil corporation or whoever to try and step in and take over the Bitcoin network, because at this point they'd have to invest quite a lot of money into mining equipment. The mining, the processing power of all of the Bitcoin miners that are out there right now, which are located all over the world, is much, much, much larger, much more computation power than all of the world's supercomputers combined. I mean, it's not even close, because we have these ASIC machines that are so good at just doing Bitcoin mining that regular computers can't compete with them whatsoever. There's actually a story about a guy who he like without permission, he took some government supercomputer and tried to mine some Bitcoins with it and did a pitifully bad job. Like he ran it for a while and he made like a couple $1,000 with this massive supercomputer, because it's just so competitively disadvantaged compared to all the specific hardware out there that does just Bitcoin mining.
All right, so let's get into, in your book, you talk about various methods versus, the paper wallet and things. So, what are these other methods for storage, and how can we go about them, and how do they compare to the paper wallet?
Paper wallets are, the nice thing about them is that they're pretty simple. You print out a QR code and some information using your printer. You want to do it on a computer that's either like dedicated to not connecting to the internet, or perhaps you would boot into Linux and not stay connected during the process of printing out the paper wallet, and thus you're still considered to be in cold storage. But they're pretty simple. The bad thing about them is that paper is not very durable. It burns, it gets wet. House fires happen. If you store it in a bank vault, you can't say for sure that no one went into your vault and took a peek at the address.
What
And
now? You could, say for instance, one really good thing about a paper wallet, you could like rip it in half and put it in a couple of put multiple ones in a couple of different places to ensure that those copies were sustained, couldn't you?
yeah, you can. You wouldn't actually want to rip the paper in half, because that's the way that QR codes work. Like, they're designed to allow you to scan them with, like, even if there are errors contained in them, and so they would still leak. Like, if you
Okay,
ripped it in
what
half,
about the
it would.
long number? You could rip that in half pretty safely. You would just
Yeah,
have to
absolutely.
very carefully type it back
You can
in,
you
right?
can do that, and there's software that can assist you. That's basically it's doing exactly that. The digital equivalent of tearing up that long number into multiple pieces. There's a piece of software, a Bitcoin client called Armory, which is like the gold standard for storing Bitcoins in cold storage, and it has a backup feature that would allow you to print out multiple wallets, send them to like a bunch of different friends all over the world, or whatever you want to do. And then you'd have to get like two out of three of your friends together to actually recover those Bitcoins if you needed to restore them. So there's definitely a lot of different ways to break up that information if you want to, for sure.
Okay, so excuse me there. I just wanted to clarify that. So let's get back to this, these other methods and how what is this other stuff and how we can look at storing bitcoins.
Yeah, so if you didn't want to go with the paper wallet option. You have lots of other options too. One of the cool things that's coming out into the market soon is hardware wallets. So like Trezor is a company that's been pretty much the first maker of hardware wallets, and they're little computers, handheld computers. You can plug them into your laptop and whatnot, but they are dedicated to specifically only doing Bitcoin related stuff. They're hardened, and so they would be much more difficult to try and hack or infect with malware or anything like that. So that would be a little digital device that you can store your Bitcoins on. They're still a bit expensive, like they're a few $100s, but I'm sure they will come down in price a whole lot as competitors come onto the market. Um, so that would be another alternative that I think will be quite popular in the future. There's you could also, if you wanted to, what I sort of recommend to people is to use TrueCrypt, to use Tails. You can create an encrypted volume that's encrypted with a password, and you can store your wallet files in that encrypted container. And the nice thing about that is you can make lots of backup copies on multiple USB drives. You could back that file up to the cloud if you wanted to. And as long as people cannot guess your password, they can't decrypt your Bitcoin related files. So you can have these backups on many different mediums in many different places. And there's much less limited chance that you're going to get locked out of your own Bitcoins through your poor backup management.
Okay. I guess that summarizes that pretty well. Let's talk about another level of Bitcoin safety. Let's talk about meeting people locally to exchange Bitcoins versus the over the internet exchange type.
Okay. So usually if you're going to buy Bitcoins online, you do it through one of these kind of like exchanges. You've got like Coinbase, Bitstamp, previously, formerly Mt. Gox existed, no longer, thankfully. And these are all places where you can kind of like link a bank account online with your account. So you could say, well, I'm going to buy $10 worth of Bitcoin, and it will take those $10 out of your bank account kind of automatically and get deposited to your online exchange Bitcoin account. Um, the other way that you can kind of get Bitcoins is well, you can obviously work for Bitcoins and receive them that way, or you could buy them for cash with people that live in your area. The most popular website for doing that is localbitcoins.com, which is, a good website. And they have a number of features built into it that makes it more secure for people to do it, for both the buyers and the sellers. They have like an escrow system, for example, where you meet up with a person and you both have to kind of prove to each other like, okay, yeah, I have the cash. Okay, yeah, the Bitcoins are in escrow. And then once everyone's happy, they can actually make the transaction go through. If there's some kind of dispute that happens, then you can appeal to localbitcoins.com's arbitration service to kind of decide what should happen in this situation. But in the meantime, they'll be held in a safe escrow, so you don't show up and send someone your Bitcoins and they're like, okay, well, sorry, I'm not giving you any cash. Good luck. Thanks for the Bitcoins. That certainly has happened to people in the past. You do want to be careful about how much cash you're transacting. Just in general, carrying a lot of cash is kind of dangerous. And there was a story about in Florida, there were a couple of guys who were embroiled in police sting operations where the police undercover cops, they offered to buy Bitcoins from these guys for amounts in excess of $10,000. And the guys didn't like fill out the proper paperwork. And so the police arrested them
So the
doing this.
government didn't get their fingers into their personal transaction, essentially, correct?
Exactly, and they were unhappy about that, and so they were, sent to the slammer for that. So you do want to be careful about, who you transact with and which amounts you should look up. What are the local laws about how much you can't transact without filling out certain paperwork and money transmitter, all this kind of nonsense. But
So this is what you do in a free country, right? You fill out paperwork anytime you want to do a transaction.
America.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And, F yeah. All right. So, we already talked a little bit about public encryption keys. You mentioned that it's not too important. Are you sure we don't want to kind of go into that and explain that a little bit?
Oh, we certainly can. It's just that you don't have to understand that stuff in order to use Bitcoin,
Okay.
and
Well,
in the future, more and more, that stuff will be completely hidden. Like, a couple of years from now, people who are coming into Bitcoin will have no clue they'll never hear the word private key or anything like that. This will all, they won't even see Bitcoin addresses. This is all stuff that will be abstracted away from the user interface. But if people are curious about it, we can certainly talk about it. Um, so in order to understand that stuff, you kind of need to understand a little bit of the fundamentals of private key cryptography. So in our last episode, you and me, we talked about some of like the old cryptographic schemes, from Roman times, which, we talked about the Caesar cipher and all this kind of stuff. And those were called symmetric key ciphers because the key that you used for encrypting and decrypting the messages was the same key used for both processes. So if your key was the number 1 and you wanted to encrypt the letter A, then you'd add A plus 1, you'd get B. And if you wanted to reverse that process, you'd take B, you'd subtract 1, you'd get back to A, right? So it's a symmetric key, a cipher. A more advanced and in many ways more flexible way of doing cryptography is a asymmetric key scheme where you have an encryption key and you have a decryption key. And modern cryptography is, for the most part, based on this kind of asymmetric approach. And this is how Bitcoin works as well. And when you have a private key, so you have a private key and public key pair in this paradigm, and you keep the private key to yourself. That's why it's called private. It's a secret that you keep to only yourself. And the public key is something that you can announce to the public. Hey, here's my public key. Take note of it. And if you need to interact with me in a cryptographic fashion, you will use this public key to do that. And what you can do with these keys is you can sign messages. So sending a message is kind of like, similar to the idea of like having your own personal signature that is unique to you. If you sign a document and some forensic analyst looks at it, they can say, okay, I can see that Jan was the guy that signed it. It wasn't someone that just wrote Jan on a piece of paper.
And, so basically, if I wanted to send somebody an email or if I wrote a document and I wanted to the people on the other end to make sure that it was really my message, this is how I would ensure that, right? It's just like we talked about earlier with downloading the Tails Linux with the MD5 or SHA-256 key code verifier. You can verify that is the file that the Tails Linux team put out and not one that the NSA or somebody else has put out. You can actually, they've put a signature on it and you can verify it. Is that correct?
Yes, exactly. It's a way of proving the authenticity of a certain message. So, this email absolutely was sent by Jan or someone that hacked his computer, I suppose, if that was that was the case. And in the Bitcoin network, it's a similar idea as well, that it's proving the authenticity of a message. So the public key is used to verify a signature. The private key is used to actually generate that signature in the first place. So only someone with that private key can sign the message, and people use the public key to verify that it is in fact the correct signature. And in the Bitcoin space, the way that we use this is private keys. We use them to sign a message that says, "Hey, here's my Bitcoin address, and I'm going to spend such many Bitcoins from this address." And we also broadcast our public key with that to the rest of the network. And people in the rest of the network, what their software is doing in the background is saying, "Okay, this guy is saying he wants to spend these Bitcoins. Let's double check this signature to verify that he is the rightful owner of the Bitcoins. If he is, then we'll all agree that he deserves to spend the Bitcoins, and we'll propagate that information throughout the rest of the network." And so that's exactly why you need to keep your private key private to yourself, preferably somewhere that's not connected to the internet. And that's why you're putting your public key out there to allow people to verify these transactions are valid. Oh, and I was going to say, and so you don't have to you don't broadcast your public key per se. Your software does that automatically, but you do have to tell people what your Bitcoin address is in order to receive Bitcoins from them.
How does one sell and spend Bitcoins anonymously? That's got to be about the trickiest part because, if you're going to, like, say, overstock.com, they sell a billion different items there that you can buy every one with Bitcoin.
Right.
From your underwear and lingerie to computer equipment, you name it. So,
Right.
you go into this website, you have your mailing address, you have all of this stuff there that identifies you, so that you can get the things that you're buying. So, how does one go through all of this and still maintain some level of anonymity?
Well, it's quite tricky. It's in many ways it's the most challenging aspect of doing Bitcoin stuff anonymously. Um, So, obviously if you're going to buy something that's connected to your name, to your postal address, etc., that's going to strongly connect your Bitcoins to that information. And that's not very anonymous. You can kind of isolate it in that you can kind of mix your Bitcoins and break them down into different pools so that spending some of your Bitcoins doesn't necessarily link your identity with all of your Bitcoins, right? That's one thing that you can do to kind of help isolate things. You can do other things as well. You could use mailing services that will kind of redirect things for you, like a PO box or a mail direction redirection service or stuff like that. And another thing that's very interesting in this space is they have like Bitcoin proxy services. I think there's one called maybe proxybitcoins.com, where basically what you're doing is people will post online. They'll say, well, I want to buy this hammer from Amazon.com. I want to do it with Bitcoins, but I don't want to tell Bitcoin. I don't want Amazon to know that it's me. So they'll post this on kind of like a central message board type place, and someone else will say, well, I want to buy such and such amount of Bitcoin. And if the number matches up, if it's a $9 hammer and the person wants to buy $9 worth of Bitcoin, then what the website will help you do is the other person will buy the thing for you in cash, and have it mailed to you, and you'll send them the $9 in Bitcoin. And so that's a way of doing this transaction in kind of like an off-chain, off the record kind of fashion. It's not completely anonymous, but it is a way of breaking the connection as far as the blockchain is concerned, so that Amazon doesn't necessarily know that you are the owner of those particular Bitcoins.
All right, so that covers proxy coins. Let's get into decentralized exchange. How would that work? That's got to be a tricky concept, and I've heard of some of these ideas are starting to enter into the QT program. So, why don't we go into this? How would a decentralized, no more Mt. Goxes, everybody has control of their own coins and their own wallets. You're not sending your money to a central bank or a central guy or anything else.
Right. So decentralized exchanges are kind of the holy grail in the crypto space right now. And there's lots of different people working on it, lots of different projects at various stages of maturity. There are some decentralized exchanges that you can use now, but basically the idea would be like to be able to trade Bitcoin for other stuff, other currencies, whether it's a fiat currency or some other cryptocurrency or whatever it is, without involving a third party on a person-to-person fashion. And one of the nice things about that, as far as anonymity goes, is that you'd only be betraying your identity to that one person that you're interacting with, rather than a whole network of people or a company or a government or whoever it is. So decentralized exchanges are a very important piece of technology. The difficult thing, the most difficult kind of exchange to achieve in in a decentralized fashion would be a fiat to cryptocurrency exchange, where basically, one person would be receiving fiat money and the other person would be receiving cryptocurrencies. Because if you want to do this through the legacy banking system, for the most part, you are prohibited from doing so in a legal fashion, right? You need to have a banking partner and they want to see your know your customer stuff and blah 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 blah. So that's very difficult. There was the service a while ago where basically the way it worked out was one person would send cash in the mail and the other person would send Bitcoin, and that seemed to work out okay. I think it died after a while. But yeah, doing cash to doing fiat to cryptocurrencies without going through the banking system is very difficult. And the more money that you're trying to transact, the more difficult it is. Which is why we still do have we have these centralized exchanges like Mt. Gox and whatnot. But in the future, where we want to go is we want to have an economy that is as much in the crypto space as possible. So when you're able to pay your rent, when you're able to buy your food, when you're able to buy stuff from other merchants and suppliers, et cetera, all in Bitcoin, then you may get to a point where you no longer need to transact between Bitcoin and fiat currencies. You just stay in Bitcoin all the time, or you stay in cryptocurrencies. Maybe you switch in between different cryptocurrencies for different purposes. But that can all be done on computers with no banking, and these decentralized exchanges would be unregulatable. There'd be no way for someone to impose a know your customer rule or anything like that.
What we also need to make sure that the audience understands here, because when you say that they're not regulatable, a lot of people are going to throw up their arms and start screaming through the building. So what people need to understand is that the code itself, the open source code for Bitcoin, for a decentralized exchange, would be the regulation. No corrupt government official
Right.
giving $3 billion payoffs to the bank is going, to these big bankers like, Goldman Sachs is going to have any effect on it. They're not going to be able to get in there and say, we're just going to screw the people anyway, and we're going to bail out all of these banks, right? So, what it's going to do is, it's there, it's yours. They can't, it's a separate thing. Sorry.
Yeah, so the idea is not that there are no rules or that there's no protection mechanisms for the consumers that are using these exchanges. Quite the contrary, there are very strong protection mechanisms based around things like escrow, arbitration, etc. But it just doesn't need to necessarily involve any third party, including the government. And even if some third party wanted to step in and try to meddle in these affairs, once you have internet money, that becomes an impossibility. Unless you are willing to shut down the entire internet, which governments simply are not willing to do. So,
Right. All right. So, boy, we've covered a lot here. We've covered Tails, Tor, how to do, use encrypted browsers and the I2P network and all of these wonderful things here. Is there anything that we have missed out of all of these topics that you feel is very important to get in?
well, this is a space that I'll mention one other thing, which is a space that I've been studying recently. I gave a presentation about this at the conference in DC, the Bitcoin conference, which is these kind of dark marketplaces. So Silk Road obviously is the most famous of these, and Silk Road is a place really where people mostly seem to buy and sell drugs that were illegal in the places where people were buying and selling them. And they would interact through a Tor hidden service. They would use Bitcoin as the medium of exchange, and they would send stuff through the mail. And there is actually a lot of market activity in these dark marketplaces. And of course, the original Silk Road was shut down, but actually, all that happened was it was splintered into a dozen different marketplaces. And now the volume of trade in all of these marketplaces in aggregate is much larger than the amount of trade that was going on just prior to the shutdown of the original Silk Road. So it seems that these marketplaces, the idea that they're going to be systematically shut down is simply not going to happen. And what I see happening more and more in the future is even if you're not a person who wants to, pseudonymously buy some guns or some drugs or whatever, we're going to see more and more market activity, standard market activity taking place through these types of marketplaces. You're going to buy a washing machine there. You're going to hire a graphic designer through one of these web spaces because you'll have all the privacy that you want. And for those that don't want to get involved with capital controls and taxes and restrictions on what you can send, where, to whom, and when, and why, you can do this stuff all through dark marketplaces and get around all of those restrictions.
And I should add that guns are perfectly legal and are wonderful for our self-defense and for fighting off tyrannous governments. So I just
Absolutely.
wanted to make that clear. How would people, I mean, is like Silk Road on a separate internet on one of these dark internets? I mean, if people even wanted to go visit a dark net website, how would they get to it?
They'd have to go through Tor, so they could use their Tor browser. They could use Tails. They'd have to, Google around a little bit to find out what the correct URL is. All of these different Tor hidden services, they have like kind of a weird looking URL. They get to pick a few like letters and numbers at the beginning, and then you have like some random stuff, and then it ends with .onion, which is the top level domain for all of the Onion hidden services. But once you find those, you can plug them right into your Tor browser or your Tails web browser and get right to those marketplaces and sign up and register an account.
So it's a little bit like how Namecoin would do .bit, and you would have to have a Namecoin like Meowbit or whatever to convert it to access the .bit websites.
Mm-hmm.
All right, so Kristov, what is the single most important concept, idea regarding safety, Bitcoin, cryptography, all that we've discussed for people to take away from this two-part interview series?
Single most important information. Well, that's a hard one to pick. Do you have an opinion about that?
Well, I mentioned to you my idea, that I've spoken with Tom and Chris Ellis and Will about, about trying to figure out a way to meme cryptography and make it cool. And,
Mm.
rather than getting it to where people don't think about it, I really think that it needs to be somehow pushed into the forefront. But, that would be my point, but that doesn't help you much.
So here's the thing. Here's the takeaway about cryptography. You may not know it, but cryptography is already making the world go around. So much of the commerce that happens in the world, so much of the economic activity, so much human action is based on the use of cryptography on computers to be able to do things safely. And so certainly the more that you understand the details of that, the more equipped that you will be able to be able to use this stuff more securely. And with the advent of Bitcoin, a few years ago, there wasn't like any like hugely good reasons to look into this stuff. I mean, it was kind of cool but it was difficult and time consuming. I remember the first time I tried to get on Tor, it was really, really confusing. You had to install Linux on your operating system and just master all these different command line things and troubleshoot, and like it would take hours and hours just to get connected for it to Tor for the first time. Now, anyone in the world on the vast majority of computers can to download and with a few clicks get onto the Tor network, and that's incredible, and that's amazing. And I think particularly with the advent of Bitcoin, what Bitcoin, it gives us two really important things. I may have mentioned this on the last show. One is that it gives us censorship resistant money, which is just going to have profound impacts on the world. And two is that with these different systems, it gives us a price discovery mechanism. So, like Tor, for example, now your computer has some incentive to jump onto the Tor network and help out the Tor network because you can get paid Bitcoin or Tor coin or whatever it is. And so now that this has happened to the world, you're now going to have incredible incentives to figure out this stuff, how to get on, how to get some bitcoins, how to register an account on a dark marketplace like OpenBazaar. I mean, this is really the future of the economy and the future of humanity. I read a statistic the other day that said that by 2009, I believe it was, already half of the workers in the world were involved in the underground economy. In France, they call it a system D, which is short for some French word. And they were projected by that by 2020, two-thirds of the world's workers would be involved in these kind of undergrounded marketplaces. I actually think that they're going to have to adjust that figure upwards because of the advent of these dark marketplaces in Bitcoin and the ability to do this stuff all on the internet and not just simply cash, hand-to-hand transactions. Because you can do so much more economically if you can interact with anyone in the world than just the guy that's around the corner with you, where you can kind of pay him under the table to clean your house or whatever it is. So this is the future of human action, is to be interacting through cryptography, privately, securely, with people all over the world. And now is the time to really figure out this stuff and understand it and master this stuff so that you can be an early adopter in the system, and you can gain incredible wealth and fulfillment through being one of the early adopters in these systems. It's hugely important. It's a tidal wave that's coming for you, whether you're ready for it or not. And I would encourage people, be the guy with the surfboard that's riding the wave. Don't be the person that's on the shore that gets smashed by it.
That's pretty funny. All right, and a couple of points that I want to add here is that basically, and what people need to understand is that money laundering is simply you and I doing business that the government doesn't like. That and technically, if you're a non-statist, you don't believe in money laundering to begin with. You have to have a government authority for money laundering to exist. Also,
money laundering. I just wanted to add to that. Money laundering is like this idea of gun control. There's no one in the world that actually is in favor of gun control, because you need guns in order to take guns away from other people, right? So gun control is it's a made up idea. Same damn thing with money laundering. If you look at the people who are doing the most egregious transactions in the world, the most stealing, the most fraud, it's all happening through the perfectly above board existing financial system. And you can't actually prevent so-called money laundering without doing money laundering all over the world. I mean, the U.S. The Federal Reserve just tried to hide like trillions of dollars by going through some bank in Belgium or something like recently to hide the effects of their quantitative easing. I mean, it's another bullshit made up term that you actually have to violate this rule in order to enforce the rule. So it's a bunch of nonsense.
And so, if you and I wanted to do an exchange, here in California, marijuana is legal. People can, it's not totally legal like Colorado and Washington, but it's just about legal. And, so if you were to hide money in Bitcoin or whatever, they would call this money laundering. You're trying to hide your money from pot or whatever, but, it's just ridiculous. The other thing that I wanted to say, and it's like it's a plant, and you're trying to outlaw a plant, and it's stupid on every level. You have to be a statist to believe in that crap. So, and what I also wanted to add was that nearly anybody who uses the internet at all, uses cryptography every single time you're on the internet, whether you're going to your banking website or Amazon, or you're sending an email, or you're just logging on to search something at Google. There is cryptography going on at every level. So, what we're doing is we're trying to bring it to the forefront of your thoughts, get it into your focus, so that you can begin to learn about it and not think that it's some dark, nefarious thing that only bad people are going to do. You're using it every day already. So now it's just the time to learn it, step up to the plate and learn it and become familiar with it, and bring it to the forefront of everyone's daily lives. We need to, when you call up your friend in the morning, first thing out of your mouth would be, what's the coolest new thing about cryptography you learned today? I mean, that's a horrible way to meme it, but it does need to be memed. So I suppose that's a wrap. Kristov, excellent series here, and we've been very happy to put this stuff together with you, and so thank you so much for your time and effort in helping us put all of this together.
Absolutely. Thank you for your thoughtful questions. And if anyone has follow-up questions, they can contact me through you if they want, or they can follow me on Twitter. My Twitter handle is @anonymouscoin, and I'll be happy to answer people's questions there as well.
All right, Kristov, thank you so much.